Morning, church. Again, am I on this one? Am I free? Oh, all right. That never works for Brian. I don't know what that says. It's like a sword in the stone kind of moment. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity for the second time to be a counselor at beginner camp out at Pettyjohn Springs. It's over by Medill. It's the camp that I grew up going to. I was once a beginner at beginner camp. There's a whole new perspective when you grow up and become the person dealing with the people who are at beginner camp. Is Owen here? Are the Hinsleys here? I'm going to talk about Owen. Oh, all right. Cool beans. I spent a week, or not a week. Thank goodness it wasn't a week. Did I say that out loud? I spent about 3 days with a group of kids from the Ada area. At beginner camp, you get put in with kids from your area, age ranges from 6 to 9 years old, in my cabin at least. I had about 5 of them. I didn't have the biggest group, but I had a group with a lot of energy, I'll say. As a kid, you have a ton of that energy. You're ready to go, and we have a million different things scheduled for beginner camp. There's a lot going on. It's one thing after another in 30-minute bites so that they can take it all in, and then our attention span's ready to move on to the next one. We're going, and we're going, and we're going, and sometimes we've got to move to something that we don't always want to go to, and so we have to sort of motivate them to come on. We got another class to go to before we can play sports, and then I promise we'll get to swim later. If you can just hang in there until swim time. Swim time's a big deal. If you don't take your nap right now, I'm going to take your canteen away. You're not getting any gummy bears today. Told them some scary stories at night so that they would maybe try to go to sleep. It almost worked. I almost got to sleep a few times out there. The reason I tell you about all of this and my fun times at beginner camp, and I say all of that not to say that I didn't love every second of it anyway. This is the profession that I chose, I suppose. Sometimes God gives us circumstance that on the onset, it seems a bit difficult. It seems a bit ridiculous. Like wrangling kids that don't want to be wrangled so structured all day for 3 days. But on the other end of it, I got another cool friendship bracelet. I got some hugs. I saw some kids who came from different backgrounds that you could tell they hadn't ever opened a Bible before for themselves. Be eager to do so. Be ready to read. By the end of it, be even a little more eager to study. Willing to talk about God. And despite all of the difficulty to get them there, I could see all the good in that. Sometimes God places us in circumstances so that we can grow, so that His life can be spread. And this is a lot like the situation of Elijah in 1 Kings. We're going to start in 1 Kings 16 if you want to be turning there this morning. Elijah was a prophet in a time where it was very difficult to be a prophet of God. Arguably the most difficult. They were actively being persecuted. Specifically, these people who wore that title, man of God, who drew close to Him. They were being rounded up. If you look with me in 1 Kings 16, close to the end, Starting in verse 29, it says, "In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him." And this is a common phrase throughout the Kings, the Chronicles, these histories. Every introduction to a king will immediately tell you what their character was like. Sometimes we get long stories about these kings, sometimes not so much, but all of them have their significance predicated by what the writer says at the beginning of their reign here. And Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, one who's referenced over and over again up to this point. When they say Jeroboam, or when they talk about a king, if they were evil, it'll say he did like Jeroboam, who was another evil king before Ahab. This one who was the example of evil is a light thing in comparison to Ahab. He's nothing in comparison to what this guy did. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, skipping down, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. Israel, the northern kingdom, in a time where the kingdoms have split in two, before the north is eventually overtaken, and then the south as well. This is the time of Elijah. This is the circumstance that he is living in. One of the few men of God left in the nation that God once called his people, that he would still like to call his people, and he would still love to call back to him. This is the situation. I cannot understate how good Brian is at transitioning really smoothly with PowerPoints, and how not so used to it I am. It is a talent that I think is underobserved. So Elijah and God in this circumstance, seeing what is happening in his kingdom, seeing what Ahab is doing as the person who's the leader of the people that he calls his, God sets out to do something through Elijah the prophet. Starting in chapter 17, it says, "Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, 'As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word.' And the word of the Lord came to him, 'Depart from here, turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook of Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there.' So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the brook of Cherith that is east of the Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. And he drank from the brook, and after a while the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land. So Elijah prays. James will say a lot later that he prayed fervently. Elijah, being a man close to God, he goes and he tells Ahab, because of what you've done, God is going to take the rain from you. For 3 years, it's not going to rain. There's going to be a drastic drought. It's going to cause food shortages. It's going to cause water shortages. It's not going to be a good deal. It's kind of God saying, I'm going to reciprocate what you have done. Not only the leader of these people, but the people themselves have turned away from God. Oftentimes in the Hebrew language, we'll see this idea of moving away from the face of Him, or turning out of the face, of leaving a relationship with God. And this is what they've done. And so God closes up the heavens, as it were. It's kind of the language we get here, that the heavens were closed. As in the place where we physically try to imagine that God is, we look up, God's up there somewhere mystically. That place is closed off from us, that there's nothing up there anymore. You've turned away from me, so for a time I'm going to turn away from you. And you'll see what that does for you. But he's not going to take that away forever. And even in this circumstance, also putting Elijah, his prophet, the one who's going for him, to the people through this as well, through this difficulty. Even the place that God provided him for a little while dries up. God has some work to do still. There's still something about him to be shown in all of this. And as we go this morning and tonight, I want us to see here in this story a characteristic of God. Something about him, a lot of things about him are revealed in this one interesting little story. But there's one prevailing idea that I think is important for us to see as we go. Continuing in chapter 17, it says, "Then the word of the Lord came to him, Arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you." So he arose, went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and said, "Bring me a little water in a vessel, that I may drink." As she was going to bring it, he called to her and says, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." And she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." This is a tough situation to walk into, to be sent to. God sends Elijah to this place, Zarephath in Sidon. When you look at the map, God is sending Elijah out of the territory of Israel into the heart of the enemy, and more than that, into a place that is known for being desolate without there being a 3-year drought going on. God sends Elijah into a situation that he knows is going to be difficult to begin with, and there he finds a widow and her son, likely on the outskirts of society already, without harsh times happening. Widows were in a very difficult situation, to say the least, in this time. No way to provide for themselves, really. Her son obviously not being of any sort of age or in any sort of situation to provide very much for them. And them, even though it's horrible and hard to read, having made peace with their fate, saying, "We're ready to eat this and die. This is it. This is the end for us." This is the situation that Elijah walks into. You can imagine the things going through Elijah's head at this point. This is the place that you've sent me, God. After all of that, this is where I'm going. My people are over here. You've called me away from them. You've called a drought on all of them. And not only that, you've sent me away from them to an even more hopeless situation. Something even more difficult. But God has something more to show and to prove. Continuing on In verse 13 it says, "And Elijah said to her, 'Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth.' And she went and did as Elijah said. She and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah." Elijah goes to these people who are completely without hope, who are on their very last legs, who are at the end of it all. And he says, "We've got nothing but enough left to make ourselves just a little bit and then pass away." Elijah says, "No. I am here, and not only am I here, but the Lord is here, and he's going to work. These things shall not run out." And he believes this wholeheartedly. Without wavering, without skipping a beat, Elijah says, "Go." And they do. And God shows here for the second time that he is ultimately the God who is over these things, the physical, that the rain is in his hands, that this is something he controls. That the bread, the jar, the flour, all of these things, easily done by God. And more importantly, that life and hope is given through him and where his presence is. That where he sends and where he goes, those whom he is with will be full of these things. Hope will never be far from him, even in the most hopeless of situations. But the story doesn't end there. So after this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. She said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." And he said to her, "Give me your son." He took him from her arms, carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged, and laid him on his own bed. He cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, you have brought calamity even on the widow, even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son." Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." The Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. The life of the child came back into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and delivered him to the mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." The woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." How could this situation get any worse? The son becomes sick and he dies. Elijah, seeing this, has an emotional response. The woman, seeing this as it's going, has an emotional response as well. "What have you done, you man of God? Did you come here just for this to happen? You came and gave us hope just to take it away? What was the point? Why would you do this?" And Elijah goes to God and he asks a question. But in his heart, I feel like he knows the answer. He believes it enough to pray for it, to speak to God about it. Spreads himself over the boy 3 times. And as the breath was taken out of him, it returns to him. "See, your son lives." And in this story, we see God who is over all of these things, despite the completely hopeless situation that continues to go down. God provides life and hope continually here. He's the God over nature, over the physical. He's the God over life itself. Even life and death are in his hands as he brings the boy back to life. And then we have the focus of all of it, where it's all brought to a head at the end of the chapter, when the woman says to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." And there's a lot of significance in the way that that's written. This is a woman of Zarephath of Sidon, not an Israelite woman, not a Hebrew. Elijah likely introduced himself, telling her what he is when he arrives, that he is a prophet of the God of Israel. Up until this point, she says the word for God, the basic one, as though he could have been any god. Ale, if you will. She kind of believes, and it's amazing to her that Elijah provides the miracle of the food. But then her son is taken away, and Elijah shows that his God is more than just a little bit of a party trick, more than just food, even though that's amazing in and of itself. But he's the God over life, that he continually gives this hope. And then she confesses that the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth, denoting the divine name, the Lord in all caps there, if your translation does that kind of thing. This is the idea. She went from being a woman who believed that there might be a God or many gods, but not really having much hope in any of them, not having much hope in anything really, to believing that without a shadow of a doubt that there is a Lord who speaks, who works, who lives, who gives hope. And he's the God of Israel, the God of Elijah. Despite all of this ridiculous situation, all of the things that are going on in this story and moving and working, despite all that Elijah, this man of God who is willing to follow him, has to go through to get to this point, God is showing that he's here to work, to spread hope, to spread the life that he has. And Elijah is about to go after this, once again to face Ahab. In another amazing story, he'll go up to Mount Carmel, challenge all the prophets of Baal, with his life literally on the line and in the balance, and the lives of all the prophets of Israel with him. Elijah did many great things throughout his life, but here, before he goes and faces what likely may have been his greatest threat, the most dangerous situation he ever walked into, this gave him hope, I believe. This furthered the knowledge of who his God is, his belief in that, his absolute faith that this is a God who lives and spreads life. It's undeniable. And in that, Elijah goes, and he continues to spread life from here. I had the scripture reading that Garrett read for us earlier this morning be the passage from Philippians, that often quoted scripture that you may or may not have seen out of context in a few places. Paul, as he's writing, Paul, another man who went through a whole lot of different things throughout his ministry, who would go through even more after the writing of Philippians for his faith. A man who was shipwrecked, a man who was stoned seemingly to death, a man who was bitten by poisonous snakes, was whipped and beaten and imprisoned, had a lot, who had had nothing. Through all of that, Paul grew closer to God. He wasn't moved farther away from him. He began to believe in him and further him more. That only impassioned him more to spread the life that he had. Because it was that life that got him through all of those things. That gave him hope for so much more beyond that. So this morning, knowing all of these things about our God, the one that we gather here to worship, to remember, to become one in, if I know that that's who he is and what he does and what he seeks to continue to do through all of us, through you and me, then what's stopping me from going with all confidence? With all the hope that has been in him through amazing people like Elijah and Paul. What could possibly stand in my way? If you have any needs of the church this morning, if you need to be baptized or if we can help you in any way, would you please come forward now as we stand and as we sing?